that one moment in life that you would live over and over again. It is that moment that I want to share with you. A moment which starts in a place called Key West, Florida, with a man named Finbar Gittelman and a ship named Wolf.
Sea's full of surprises. It's great and vast and beautiful and scary sometimes. It'll put you to the challenge. You think you've seen it all, and then wham, there's something you never imagined would happen. The most difficult thing is when things get really dangerous, which they can. And I've been very, very lucky. I've been very lucky over the years. I've never lost a crewman. Never. I did lose a ship. I think the most difficult thing that I have to live with is when I lost that ship, to give the order to abandon ship. That's probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. She's full of surprises, and she is a hard mistress sometimes, but she's also a wonderful lover.
My name is Matt Dean. Several years ago, I lost everything that I thought I cared about and found myself in Florida attempting to restart my life. I had chased the American dream of having a family and a house and a steady job, only to have it completely turned upside down. In an agonizing 6-month period of time, I'd lost my marriage, my job, and the small business that I'd started. In desperation, I sold everything that I had and moved to Orlando, Florida, looking for freelance work. It was around this time that I was introduced to someone for whom I would grow to greatly respect. Someone who opened up a whole new world to me.
I am Finbar Gittelman. I am 3/4 of a century old, and I am an Admiral, Conch Republic Navy. I'm Supreme Commander of Conch Republic Military Forces and First Sea Lord. Most folks go through a period during their childhood and their adolescence where they have to, I guess the expression is, find yourself. And I never had to go through that because I sort of was always aware of what I am. When I was going to grade school and the boys would play hooky and they'd all go to the park to play ball, I wouldn't do that. I'd go to the water. I'd go down to the docks, and I'd sit there and talk to the old guys hanging out on the docks, and I'd find things that would float, anything, boards, logs, whatever, find a piece of line, tie them together, make a raft, go paddling around. And that was it. I was always aware that I was a sailor. I didn't know much of anything about being a sailor, but I knew that's what I was. And I knew I belonged on the water since my earliest recollections. When we set the sail, I'll give the orders, slack blue lines, you let them run free, and then somebody's going to get on the halyard, which is the first one on this pin, okay, and heave it up as high as it'll go. I feel much more able and capable when I'm at sea than I do when I go ashore, because when I go ashore, all kinds of things I run into that I don't necessarily understand, and it's hard to deal with. At sea, I don't have that. Sometimes it's hard to deal with, but never it's anything I don't understand. Out there, I understand all of it.
Hey, Matt. How you doing, sir?
You sleep good?
I did.
Good.
I had been in Fort Myers for around a year when a friend named John Buffar introduced me to Finbar, Julie, and Wolf, who had been hired to work a local pirate festival.
Fire! Okay, all heads was on the port tack.
Though I'd never been on board a ship and never had a strong draw to the ocean, the moment my foot touched the deck of Wolf, all of that changed. It was like a wave washed over me and separated everything I was before Wolf from everything I was after Wolf.
Hey, welcome aboard, folks. I am Finbar the Terrible of Cuba. Going out today to do a little hell raising.
I found myself falling in love with a world that I had never known existed. New ways of living opened up in front of me, like a sail on a ship that'd been waiting for the wind. Suddenly, the rough seas of my own life didn't seem to matter anymore. Hard times were a way of life for a sailor, and that was okay. You took the good with the bad and you sailed through to the next port. I sailed on Wolf every chance I had, but it soon came time to move to California and further pursue my film career. Days turned into years as I struggled to build a business. All the while, I longed to return to Wolf. In 2015, I get an excited call from Julie. After years of waiting, they were finally going to get the chance to sail to Cuba. Wolf had sailed for decades around the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, and up and down the eastern seaboard. But Cuba had been highly restricted. With relations mending between the Obama administration and the Cuban government, a small window was opening. Julie then told me that this was the first time Finbar would be traveling back to Havana in over 50 years.
Some of my earliest memories are in Cuba. And things were very, very different then. I used to go there with my family. I had some Cuban family. And back in those days, we used to go there. They used to come here. We used to run back and forth and whatever. And I have a lot of very fond childhood memories in Cuba.
Finbar had grown up in both Miami and Havana while traveling back and forth with his father.
Of course, back in those days, you could go back and forth freely. And I sometimes tell people the story how we used to drive to Cuba, and they didn't believe me. But we did. We used to drive from Miami down to Key West, get on the ferry with the car, and drive off in Havana.
When Castro took over in 1959, Finbar's family fled the country after being forced to turn over everything they had to the government. For them, the revolution left a painful mark.
When I think about Cuba, I can't help but relate it to what my own experiences and the experiences of my family. I have some Cuban family, and they did not fare very well after the revolution.
Finbar would not be back to Havana again, but was drawn back into Cuban waters in the 1980s.
I was there during the Mariel boat lift. I took part in that, and that was a very emotional thing. A very emotional thing.
Finbar's stories of his time in Cuba were something I'd been wanting to film for years, so I jumped at the chance to document the trip. Meanwhile, Julie began gathering a crew to help prepare Wolf.
Some guys are cursed with a really expensive wife. I'm lucky, I don't have that. My wife's not all that expensive. But my mistress is.
The ship needed a lot of work to be ready to sail, but people were happy to help. Wolf has a way of gathering amazing people around her, and sailing to Cuba was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
We're very lucky in that we have so many good friends. We have a lot of wonderful people that hang out with us, and so we're always happy to have them on board. Each and every one of them leaves a little piece of their spirit aboard. Most people think of a ship as an inanimate thing, and it's not. A ship has a spirit, and it's the spirit of the people who built her, the spirit of the people who sailed on her. And a ship acquires a spirit over the years and becomes a spiritual being, just like a person is. Wolf was my father's name, so it's named after him. And he wasn't a sailor, but he was a wolf. The other thing is that the wolf is my spirit animal. I was one of the guys that actually built her, so I literally have my blood and sweat in her. She's home. We sometimes live ashore temporarily from time to time, but this is real home. Yeah.
The ship is nearly ready when we get word that the visas have been approved, and we would soon be underway. Julie had arranged for us to be part of a goodwill race that had secured permits to sail from Key West to the resort town of Veradero and then on to Havana. Because of the confrontational relationship the U.S. had with Cuba since the 1960s, Cuba seemed very mysterious to me. I was interested in finding out more about the people and the living conditions, as well as explore the culture and the history. There were, of course, hundreds of places we wanted to see, but because we'd be there for a very short time, we'd have to limit our visits to a few key places: the old Spanish section of Havana, the Hemingway House, Mariel, and most important of all, the Hotel Nacional where Finbar had spent much of his youth.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there when I was a kid, and I had very, very fond memories of it.
The crew finished loading Wolf with supplies while we watched the wind pick up speed. Sailing requires the right amount of wind. Too much wind makes for a rough and sometimes dangerous trip. Not enough, and it can take you days to travel a very small distance. With the last of the supplies loaded, we are finally ready to sail for Cuba.
Stand by to get underway.